I rang the doorbell and stepped back to wait for the owner. I hugged my dear Heather and pulled her towards me for a quick kiss. Oh, how I loved this woman. She gave me the happiest 4 years of my life. We were going to celebrate our free evening again with my best friend Doug Beavers. This time we were at his New Year's party at his mansion. I was looking forward to seeing Doug, but I was even more excited to spend the evening and night with my wife in the new year in style. I was about to ring the bell again when Doug finally opened the door for us. He grinned and very loudly invited us to enter. I already knew from the number of cars parked on the street and in his yard that this was going to be a very large party, but I was still shocked by the number of people crowding inside his house. Doug reached out to Heather and hugged her tightly, then kissed her tenderly on the cheek before dragging her into the house. He turned away from her and shook my hand before stepping aside again so I could enter. The maid took our coats and disappeared with them. Doug walked between us and said, "God, I'm glad to see you too. I really hate it when my parties get so big, but it seems like I have to invite everyone. I either run a business or have social obligations to everyone on my list, except a few good friends like you two. Clarissa is somewhere nearby, probably dodging the hands of libertines as usual." As the evening progressed, Heather and I danced and ate and drank far more than we should have. We weren't worried because we knew we had a bed upstairs when we needed it. We were one of the few couples invited to spend the night, so we didn't have to drive drunk, hail a cab, or force one of us to stay sober as the designated driver. I'm moderately successful in the investment business. Oh my gosh, I'm one of the top-selling brokers in my office and in the top quartile of brokers in the entire company. So I knew or had an inkling about a lot of the people in this room. I agreed with Doug. Many of them were available girls or worse. My Heather was a very beautiful woman, and she had to fight off advances just like his Clarissa. As the evening progressed, I took advantage of the opportunity to socialize. I greeted current clients and approached some of the more affluent people in the room in an attempt to attract new clients. As the evening progressed, I also kept my eyes on Heather. I trusted her completely, but I have to admit that I was still a little jealous. I kept an eye on her constantly, and from time to time, I took it upon myself to rescue her from a man who, it seemed to me, was trying to be more than just a charming companion. Every time I had to rescue her at previous parties, I received a smile and a gentle kiss from Heather, usually with a quiet "thank you" or "thank you for saving me, honey" from her. This evening was no exception. Many times I approached when I saw that she was trying to escape from the man who was about to take her away. I received her gentle touch and smile before a hug or kiss on the cheek, followed by her quiet "thank you." We'd talk a little, or maybe have a quick dance or drink, and then go our separate ways again. As the evening drew to a close, many people left, leaving only those who intended to celebrate the new year with our host. I began to notice that one particular man was following Heather and was almost stalking her. He never strayed far from her and constantly watched her. I recognized his gaze. He was hooked on her, completely infatuated with her, and took every opportunity to get his way. At first, Heather ignored him or even walked away. As the evening wore on, she began to stay with him longer, even smiling or laughing when he spoke. Sometimes she gently touched his forearm. It wasn't like my Heather. She had never flirted for so long with any of the men who approached her, especially a stranger. Doug saw me watching them just before midnight and came over to me. He said, "This is Jonathan Douglas with Heather. He's a real ass and a real ladies' man. I didn't even invite him, but one of the ladies I invited brought him as her date. I haven't seen them together since you and Heather arrived." Doug stood next to me and looked around the room carefully. A curious expression appeared on his face. Then he continued, "Actually, I think Douglas's girlfriend has already left now that I think about it." Earlier that evening, she watched as he followed Heather around for a few minutes, and then I saw that they were having a rather animated conversation. I haven't seen her since then. He's a problem Stan. Problem with a capital P. He is married, and they are separated more often than together. He preys on married women, or those who have something he wants. He usually likes married ladies and single women with money that he thinks he can get. I do not know why. Heck, he's worth millions on his own. You need to keep an eye on him. He can convince a nun to sleep with him and make her think it was her idea, and she loves him forever. For the third time that evening, I went over to separate Heather and Jonathan. He looked at me the same way he had on most previous occasions when I broke him up from Heather and made a condescending remark as I walked away with her. This time Heather didn't thank me. She gave me a frustrated look and said, "Stan, what's wrong with you today?" You could see that I enjoyed talking to Jonathan. Why did you feel the need to separate us? He's not like most of the lechers you saved me from. He's a really interesting guy and has some of the funniest stories. He's running for mayor, and he was telling me about some of the people he meets and has to deal with during his campaign. When he learned that I worked in my company's public information and advertising department, he began asking me questions about how best to convey his mayoral message to voters. I think he might offer me a job, honey. I really need to communicate with him more. Just think what could have happened if I had been able to get a position in his administration. I don't really care, Heather. I don't trust that asshole, and I don't like him around you. Doug says he's nothing but trouble and a real womanizer. I've also heard some really bad things about him, and I want you to be safe. From what I've heard, the position he's interviewing you for will require you to work tirelessly. Heather glared at me for a moment. I saw the anger flash across her face, and I was afraid I had ruined everything. But then she smiled. As she leaned in to kiss me on the lips, she said, "Aw, this is cute. I really think you're jealous. Well, you don't have to worry about it, honey. You are all mine." We had already parted again in a whirlpool of people communicating before I realized that she said that I was all hers, and not that she was all mine. When this thought struck me, I paused for a moment and wondered if it was just a slip of the tongue or if she was trying to tell me something subconsciously. 3 months later, I have reason to remember that night in painful detail. The past 2 months have been turbulent in my home. Shortly after the party, Heather began arriving home late from some of her meetings or visits to her parents. When I asked her about her tardiness, she got angry and defensive, saying she either lost track of time or had to finish a project or something before she could leave. She also started volunteering for the local Republican Party after work, which took up her time. Heather is the leader of her department, and her skills in this area are almost legendary. She became a volunteer office manager for the local campaign headquarters and provided advice on public information initiatives. From what little I heard, she cleaned up the chaos and became a very popular volunteer. Like many unsuspecting cuckolded husbands, as she began to spend more time away from our home, I began to notice that our sex life was suffering. I was rejected more often, and when I did get sex, it wasn't as good. Now she allowed me to have sex with her, where we had made love before, sometimes for hours on end. Oh, she always had a reason. For example, she was tired, or it was too late, or we didn't have time, but the fact remained a fact. Whereas before she had willingly, enthusiastically, passionately participated in our lovemaking, now she seemed to do it reluctantly, as if it was an unpleasant duty if we were to have sex at all. One day I was talking to Doug about recent problems in my marriage. He gave me a worried look. Finally he said, "Stan, I'm starting to worry. I may have been the reason your marriage failed. I've been hearing for the past few weeks that Jonathan has found another married woman to play with. Rumor has it that he met her at a New Year's Eve party, and we both know where he was and who he spent most of his evening with on New Year's Eve. She is also believed to be volunteering for his mayoral campaign." I felt dizzy and lost my breath for a moment. Doug looked at me and continued talking. He said, "Stan, what's the matter? You suddenly became white as a sheet." I sat there for a moment looking at Doug, then said, "Heather started volunteering for the Republican Party in their office about an hour after work and on Saturdays. She always comes home late and refuses to talk more about what she does. It seems like every time I bring it up, she gets defensive and angry. In the evenings when she comes to, she gets angry if I even go near her and becomes almost violent if I try to see her naked or make love to her." Doug leaned back in his chair and pursed his lips for a moment, then said, "Stan, I'm going to find out what's going on with you, and if... No, let's just say that I intend to make him pay if he abused my hospitality, having an affair with my best friend's wife. I'd be pissed if he picked up some married woman at one of my parties, but abusing my hospitality by taking your wife is even worse. I should have made him leave when his girlfriend did, but I was too worried about being a good host. If I am the cause of your problems, my friend, I promise to do everything in my power to fix it for you. I guess I should talk a little more about Doug here. He is my best friend. I would trust him with my life. Hell, I would trust him in a room with my naked wife even if they both hadn't had sex in a year. He would never do anything bad to me. We were closer than brothers. Doug is smart, probably a lot smarter than anyone I've ever met. We were both in the same class in high school. He was giving the valedictorian speech, and I was trying my best to place in the top 10 of our graduating class of 223 people. He spent 1 year in college and decided it was a waste of time. He never had to study and missed almost all of his classes, but still scored a 4.0. He ended up just taking a couple of finance courses and then started teaching himself everything he needed to know about investing and finance. Of course, the reason he needed to know about business and finance was because during his freshman year of college, he inherited just over $70,000 when his grandparents died. Unlike most young people, when he received the money, he did not spend it. He actually bought a nicer used pickup truck and invested the rest in the stock market. The first 2 shares he purchased were based on a broker's recommendation. Of course, they were the spice of the day, and the only ones making money were the broker and the brokerage house. This made Doug really angry, and he started studying. He watched CNBC, read, and researched. He decided to open a discount account with an online brokerage. He transferred his entire net worth to the account and began investing on his own. From the first trade that Doug made on his own, he began to make money, much more than with the help of so-called experts. Of course, it didn't hurt that he started investing in the late 1980s during the tech boom and dot-com craze. He got in and out of many high-paying stocks. No, he didn't make money on all of his purchases, but he was able to increase his savings exponentially. Wise, and he was smart enough to help out when things started to go to hell. He moved his investments into safer, more common stocks and drove the market up with them. He bought Berkshire Hathaway at just over 17,000 bakizin per share and sold it when the price reached 72,357 second per share 3 years later. By then, he was a multi-millionaire and was doing business with other people, either through venture capital or other investments, including real estate. I graduated from college and worked as a salesman for a restaurant chain for 4 years. I didn't like traveling, and I was very serious about Heather, so I became a stockbroker. I managed a small portion of Doug's millions. He gave me some of his investments to manage when I was just starting out in business. I suspected that he did it to help a friend, and I felt guilty that he did it. I knew he didn't need me to advise or manage any part of his portfolio and felt it was a charity. He convinced me that I was needed. His argument was twofold. First, he wanted a portion of his investments to be put into various brokerage houses for safety. Second, he felt that someone in the business might hear about good deals or bad information about some of his companies before he did. No, neither of us even thought for a moment about what could be considered insider trading. But every now and then I found a pearl of wisdom that I could share with him. We both prospered. He referred many of his friends or acquaintances to me if they wanted to use a full-service brokerage. I then made money by making trades for them. Doug did not work outside the home. He worked 8 to 10 hours a day, and very hard, but only for himself. He researched stocks on his own, traded, and lived large. He tried to bring me and Heather fully into his social circle. We went with him to many charity events at his expense. Of course, from time to time I paid bills for some events because I, as a broker, also had an expense account. Doug and I went to political meetings and interacted with influential people in our area. I think we went to every party Doug threw at his house. Friday night, after Doug and I talked, We had to go to a 500D or a plate political rally with Doug and his lady. He treated Heather and I again. This time, for some reason, Heather was even more reluctant to come with us than usual. I'm afraid I insisted that she accompany me, and to this day I regret doing so. I suppose the train wreck our marriage was headed for would have happened as soon as Doug's investigators on Heather released their report, but at least I would have remained in the dark for a while longer. However, this dinner was the beginning of the end for us. When we arrived, I saw that we were at a reception where the current state Senate candidate was scheduled to speak in support of other state and local candidates. The money paid for the tickets went to the state Republican Party, although some of it would have gone to support local politicians. What I didn't realize was that the guest of honor was to be a mayoral candidate for our fair city. Of course, it was none other than Jonathan "Asshole" Douglas. As we entered, I saw Jonathan standing at the front of the room, smiling and chatting with several dignitaries. I felt Heather pull away slightly and turned to see what was bothering her. She stood staring at Jonathan. Her face shone like that of a woman in love. Then I suspected that I had lost my wife. I asked, "What?" I saw Heather shake herself slightly and then smile faintly at me. "Sorry, dear. I just didn't understand who this dinner was for." She looked so guilty that I wondered if it was true, but said nothing. She must have known Jonathan would be there since she worked part-time at the campaign headquarters. I thought that now I understood why she was so reluctant when I insisted that we come. I looked at Doug and saw that he was watching our little conversation. He turned and glared at Jonathan before plastering a smile on his face and placing his hand on the small of Heather's back. He led her to a chair and pulled it out, helping her sit down. He then sat Clarice down on the chair that was supposed to be on his left. I walked past him as he was doing this, and he said, "Sorry, Stan. I didn't know he was one of the recipients of our generosity when he invited you." I saw her face, buddy. "I hope I'm wrong, but I have an appointment with a friend on Monday that I'd like to introduce you to. Can we have lunch? Say around 11:30. After finishing her meal, Heather excused herself and went to the restroom. I noticed that as she stood up from the table, Jonathan stood up and left the room through the other door. I thought for a moment, then began to get up and follow him. Doug put his hand on my shoulder and said, "No, Stan. It's been taken care of, and if it's her, it's already too late anyway. Just wait until Monday, please." Later that evening, I lost sight of Heather again and went looking for her when I returned from the toilet. I managed to sneak onto the stage and hide behind the curtain. I heard moans and quiet, gentle voices. One of them I immediately recognized as Heather's voice. I felt an instant surge of anger and headed towards the voices. I tripped over the rope and made some noise. I heard Heather whisper, "Oh, someone is coming. I need to get out of here, honey. It won't do any of us any good if we get caught now. See you in the office. I love you." I heard a quick slap, as if she was quickly kissing someone, then quick steps moving away to the other side of the stage. I followed them, but was too late to notice what I assumed was my cheating wife and Jonathan. I was slowly walking back the way I came when I ran into Doug in the hallway. His face looked like a thundercloud. He grabbed me and made me stop and look at him. He said, "Damn it, Stan. I told you to leave it as is. My people need to gather information for you before you do something stupid. If she really is cheating on you, and I believe she is, we need information, evidence, so we can plan and carry out proper revenge on this asshole, and so you can get the best deal in your divorce, if that's what you want. The way you try to do this, the only thing you'll achieve is getting screwed by the legal system." After he calmed me down a little, Doug continued, "I saw them hurrying down the other corridor from here. They stopped at the door to the classroom and she looked around, trying to find you. When she didn't see you, she got scared and told him that she thought you were wandering around trying to find them. Now you have a suspicious traitor on your hands, and it will be more difficult to get the goods from her. When we got back to the table, we acted it out. We made sure Heather and a few others saw us laughing and passing the pocket flask to each other. Heather glared at me as I took my seat next to her and asked where we were. Around this time, Clarice walked up to Doug and hugged him. She smiled at us and said, "Okay, you two. Next time I catch you sneaking out to your car to get a drink, I'll either go with you or turn you into the police. Now let me take a sip from this flask." We watched as Heather relaxed a little. Then she turned to Clarissa and asked, "Oh my God. So what were these two doing? I wondered where they were when I couldn't find them." Clarissa laughed and said, "Oh yes, I tried to get to them for my share before they went inside, but as you can see, they beat me to it." Later, during the dance, it was my turn with Clarissa. She became lost in me, and one day when I tried to turn to look around the room behind me, she refused to follow my lead. She kissed me tenderly on the cheek and said, "No, Stan, you really don't want to look there. Just dance with me and try to enjoy the evening. I know what you're going through right now, and trust me, it's only going to get worse. Just remember, Doug and I are here for you, and we will always be here for you." I relaxed a little and kissed her back gently. "Thank you for helping with the conversation earlier. I almost lost it, and Doug seems to think that would be very bad of me. I want to rip this asshole's head off so badly that I don't know what to do." The rest of the week and weekend were hard for me. I was alternately scared and angry. I knew deep down that Heather had left me emotionally and that it was only a matter of time before she left me physically. We haven't been a happy couple in weeks. I began to distance myself from her mentally, although I was not sure that she was cheating on me. If she didn't cheat, we had some other problem because we just weren't as loving a couple as we used to be. Finally, my meeting with Doug and his friend arrived. I was pretty sure his friend would be a private detective. I was on edge and felt my stomach churning. He was upset and had heartburn from the acid. I could feel my anger simmering somewhere beneath the surface, and I knew the other two men could see it. I was scared of what I thought I might find out, and yet eager to find out. Doug stood up as I approached the table and shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug. After the greeting, he introduced me to his friend Simon Hobbs, who actually turned out to be an investigator. We sat down and studied the menu for a minute to order our dishes. The waitress came up and took our order. Then Doug said, "Okay, why don't we get this unpleasant business over with first?" He looked at his other guest, then back at me. The private detective reached into his briefcase and pulled out a large envelope. He handed it to me and said, "We have been following your wife and Mr. Douglas in accordance with Mr. Beaver's instructions. The surveillance continued for 20 days from the time we were hired until last Saturday evening. During this period, we found that the subjects ate lunch together every day, except on Sundays, when she always seemed to stay at home. Their meals were scattered throughout the city, but always took place in better hotels, after which they retired to a room rented by Mr. Douglas's campaign. On 8 different occasions, we were able to gain entry to a room by posing as a room service waiter. In all 8 cases, none of the subjects were dressed and the bed was in use. Photos of the room and subjects are included in the report. We also made audio recordings of each meeting by placing a microphone under the room door. Subjects had sex at every hotel visit during our observation period. For many days, we recorded inappropriate contacts at the campaign headquarters or after it. In fact, we have photographs of the subjects engaging in sexual acts 3 times at campaign headquarters and once while they were attending a party at a local bar with some of Mr. Douglas's friends and supporters. Perhaps the best, or at least the most disgusting thing we recorded was when Mr. Douglas used your wife to gain support for the Municipal Employees Union. They met with Union President Stephen Negrano at the Gentlemen's Club. He seemed very taken with your wife. We have photos of her sitting on his lap with his hand under her dress. My operative managed to get close enough to record the conversation. Listen to this portion of the recording, then we will continue. Simon placed a small laptop on the table and began playing a segment from the DVD. He said, "You will be provided with a copy of this DVD in your report, but I wanted to discuss this incident with you before we adjourn our meeting." My operative was very excited about this information, and I believe your lawyer will be too. Doug and I leaned forward and watched and listened to the following segment. During the session, Heather sat between Jonathan and Stephen. The 2 men leaned over her to talk while Jonathan's hands wandered. He caressed Heather's breasts and held his hand under her skirt for a few moments as the fragment unfolded. One day we heard Heather trying to persuade him to stop, but he told her, "Now, Heather, I can feel how excited you are, and you know how much you like what we are doing. Just relax and go with the flow. Not that things like this don't happen at this club from time to time." When he paused, Jonathan leaned towards Heather and kissed her tenderly. She moaned and pressed her breasts against him as his hand continued to work under her skirt, one of the shortest skirts I had ever seen her wear. This, I must add, is something I have never seen before. From the angle from which the operatives were filming, I clearly saw that she was not wearing panties. As Jonathan leaned back in his seat, Stefan reached out and pulled her towards him. She began to rise and struggle, but he continued to pull her until she was in his lap. His large hand slid under her dress. He unbuttoned her top and started kissing her breasts. Heather hissed, "Stop it, Stefan." Stephen looked at Jonathan and said, "Jonathan, I think you know what you need to do to get union approval. I want to spend the weekend with this lady. If I get this, I'll make sure the union supports your candidacy." Heather tensed and tried to get up, hissing, "No, this will never happen. Now let me go." Stephen simply looked at Jonathan and raised his eyebrows while he held Heather in his lap and continued to play with her. Jonathan swallowed and leaned toward Heather. He said, "Honey, we really need this support. Please just go with him and help me with this. I mean, it will help secure our future and, well, it doesn't mean you've never made love before. Just tell your asshole husband that you have a meeting this weekend." In the video, Heather looked shocked and resisted for a moment. Then we saw her relax. She moaned and turned her head towards him, and they kissed. Around this time, the club manager approached the table. He looked at Heather, then at the men on either side of her. He seemed nervous and stuttered as he said, "Please, Mr. Negrano, I've been ignoring a lot for you, but I've been informed that you and the boys are becoming too obvious. Lieutenant Jones told me that the chief asked some of his detectives to come to the club and try to reduce the number of demonstrations that you and the lady just had. If they catch us allowing things like this to happen, they will shut me down. Could you please take this to one of the back rooms or to the hotel? Please, sir. This business is all I do for a living." Stephen laughed and looked at one of the large men on the other side of the table. He said, "Hello, Ralph. Why don't you give Joe a couple thousand for his trouble? The little lady and I are going to Doubletree for the weekend. Prepare everything for me, okay? Frame it as a meeting of union leaders, as we usually do." I felt myself getting more and more upset and started to get up. I growled, "That lying bitch." She wasn't there last weekend. She called me on Friday evening to say that she had been assigned a disaster relief project for her employer and was flying to San Francisco. Doug and Simon grabbed me and sat me back down in my seat. Simon said, "Please wait, sir. I want to fast forward and show you one more clip, and then we'll just let you read the report for yourself. We have some ideas on this that I wanted to talk to you about, but I thought you might want to watch the DVD before we talk about them." Now, my operative stopped filming in the club and called for reinforcements. My operatives managed to get ahead of Stanley at Doubletree. After his goons checked him in, he and Heather went into a bar for a couple drinks. My operatives followed the thugs in the hotel uniform we had purchased into the room. When they opened the door, my men followed them. After the thugs finished inspecting the room, my men began to adjust the pillows, flowers, and other decorations. Simon smiled and continued, "The senior manager even sent his assistant downstairs to get fresh flowers and more champagne so that they would have an excuse to wander around the room longer. We were able to place several cameras and microphones in the main room and 2 bedrooms. By the time your wife and Stanley returned to the room, they were both drunk. The cameras recorded these shots, among others. Simon started playing DVDs on his small computer again. Heather and Stanley entered the room and closed the door. Stanley leaned over and kissed her. Then with a roar, he literally tore her blouse apart. The buttons came off and scattered in all directions. He pulled it off her shoulders as Heather lowered her skirt. After her skirt fell into a heap at her feet, she shrugged and let what was left of her blouse fall next to her. I already knew from the photos taken at the club that she wasn't wearing any underwear, so now she was essentially naked. She stepped and kicked off her shoes, then took Stephen's hand and, giggling, pulled him into the largest bedroom and towards the king-sized bed. Heather undressed Stephen and pushed him back onto the bed. After several minutes of video, we saw another male figure enter the frame. Stephen looked at him and smiled. The second man we could now see was the director of city services. On records, Heather was shown having sex with 2 men. After that, Simon turned off his computer. He looked at me for a moment and said, "Your wife stayed in this hotel room until checkout time on Monday. During this time, she slept with all the senior managers of the Municipal Employees Union, as well as Stephen. We've heard plans to use union money and paid union workers to support Jonathan's mayoral bid." Late Saturday evening, Jonathan visited the room. He, the director, and Stephen had sex with Heather most of the night. We also have photos of this and footage of them planning to misuse the city funds if Jonathan is elected. We also have photos of Senator Nussbaum and 2 judges having sex with your wife and Jonathan Douglas. Records show he also traded her sexual favors for their approval. The investigator looked at me before continuing. He said, "During your attempt to catch your wife and Mr. Douglas at a campaign dinner, they were planning to have sex on stage. He pulled her dress down below her breasts and took off her panties. He was just starting to perform when she heard you and made him stop. That's when they ran away from you. We have photographs of what happened there. It would be better if you didn't interfere. Photographs of this action in that place would be very destructive. We were going to take pictures with the crowd visible in the background. At least you didn't get caught and cause a scene that would further undermine your efforts to end things on a positive note for you. We have provided you with a copy of the entire file, sir, and will provide it to your lawyer if you wish. Our investigative fees cover any local court testimony if necessary. I would, however, recommend that we continue to monitor for possible criminal prosecution. I know the police are usually responsible for this, but if we give them and the FBI some documents about misuse of campaign funds and conspiracy, they will take our charges more seriously. Plus, if you file for divorce and your wife ends up in jail, you'll get a better settlement." Even knowing this was coming, I have to admit I was upset and shocked. I could not believe the depth of depravity and disrespect my wife exhibited while she was under surveillance. The document showed that she felt she was in love with Jonathan. They were actively discussing how and when she would leave me. She was ranting about the position she was promised in Jonathan's administration if he was elected mayor. Perhaps what shocked me the most was her willingness to spend a weekend at Doubletree and the sexual acts she performed there for her lover and his friends. Some of the sexual things Heather did with Jonathan were things she absolutely refused to do to me or for me. On many occasions, she even initiated sex later on the weekend and in their private sessions. I always knew that Heather was driven to succeed in her career and admired powerful people, but I just couldn't believe all the things she was willing to do to get ahead. I felt almost physically ill. I didn't eat much, and I noticed that Doug didn't either. After the investigator left, we drank a little. We were both silent for a moment, lost in our own thoughts, before Doug said to me, "Stan, I'm so sorry I ruined your marriage. I consider myself completely to blame for your troubles and intend to make amends to you. I know I can't undo what I allowed to happen, but I intend to make things as right for you as I can. I'll find you a good lawyer for your divorce. I will give you any other support you need until you are as close to who you were before as possible." I moved away from the table and looked at Doug. I said, "Well, start looking for this lawyer." I was almost ready to give her an ultimatum. Either she will stop acting like this, or we will get divorced before I know for sure about her cheating. Now I will never leave this bitch. Oh my God, I can't believe she did all this. I wonder when she changed, or if I just never knew what kind of woman she really was. As for the other thing, you know as well as I do that Heather's betrayal was not your fault. And because of this, you don't owe me anything. On Thursday, Doug called me and said, "Hello, my friend. I found you a real shark as a lawyer. She hates cheaters with a passion and always takes the side of the innocent in divorce proceedings. She truly hates public figures and businessmen who use their status and position to influence women. If you act correctly, you can not only dump Heather and keep most of your assets, but you can also get your piece of meat from Jonathan. Doug gave me the name and phone number of a lawyer he recommended. I called her later that day to set up an appointment for a consultation. When I told her assistant who I was, she said they were expecting my call. She also said that they had penciled in an appointment for the next morning at 9 a.m. if I could make it. I agreed to a meeting time and received a list of things I needed to take with me, information that I should have with me for the first meeting. When I arrived the next morning, I was immediately shown to the office. I was impressed with my new lawyer, and we quickly began a friendly discussion about my wishes regarding my upcoming divorce proceedings. I told my new lawyer, Sally, I want to dissolve this marriage with all property. I know I probably won't get it, but it's what I want. I want to sue this wife-stealing bastard for everything we can. I want to deprive him of the opportunity to participate in the mayoral elections and leave him penniless. Sally smiled and leaned back in her chair. She rocked it slightly from side to side, thinking. Finally, she smiled and asked, "Do you really want to do this? Or do you want to rape him financially? Will it cost him the election and his good name, as well as send him to prison? We can almost certainly get him some jail time if we do this right. I've already looked at parts of the detective's report and it's good. Sorry, I know how bad this is for you and your marriage, but the information contained in it is so terrible that we could crucify most of the major players in this little mess. In fact, I am required to turn over the investigator's report to the authorities because they violated several federal laws. If you let me do this first and then file for divorce, we can deal him a more painful blow with retribution. If you file first, he may be able to escape and avoid capture for a while. I don't care what we do to him and those other idiots who had sex with Heather, while it hurts and very strongly. I know Heather is to blame for this whole mess, but she couldn't do this to him if he didn't want to. From what I saw when he first met her, I'm guessing he was the aggressor. He stalked her until she succumbed to his charms and climbed into his bed. You know, it takes two to tango. She always wore rings to let him know she was married. In fact, I heard them talking on tapes about her stupid husband and planning how to treat me when the time came for the big breakup. Sally and I worked through her questions, and I made a decision. I told her to prepare and file divorce papers immediately. Sally and I also agreed that the private investigator's report should be immediately turned over to the FBI so they could begin an investigation into campaign law violations and misuse of union and city funds and offices. Sally suggested that I contact the process server to get Heather served and threaten to file lawsuits against Mr. Douglas. She said, if he works like most politicians and powerful people, he will either threaten you with physical harm, threaten to fire you from your job, or threaten to countersue you. If you persist, I expect that he will offer to negotiate with you secretly and bribe you. If so, depending on where he gets his money, we could prosecute him for even more campaign law violations. As slippery as many are in public office, I expect he will try to divert campaign funds to bribe you. Sally reached into her drawer and gave me a very small microphone and a tape recorder. She said, I want you to always have this with you and for it to work. Wear a microphone hidden in your hair and hide a voice recorder in your car. The range of the transmitter is about 1 kilometer. If your car is out of range of the transmitter, this small microphone is capable of recording up to 6 hours of talk inside the device. The device will download all the recordings stored inside as soon as you are within range of your car. If you give me your keys, I'll have someone install a dash cam in your car while we're done here. I also suggest that you either rehire a private investigator or allow me to hire one for you to continue surveillance of your wife and Mr. Douglas. I have heard rumors that Mrs. Malone is not the first wife he has seduced, and when he was caught, he tried illegal means to solve the problem. If we have a plan and suggestions on tape, this time we can really hurt him and your wife. I smiled and said, the private detective gave the same recommendation. I still have it on deposit. The next Thursday morning, Sally called me and said, Mr. Malone, we are ready to file for divorce and serve your wife. Do you still want to follow our plan to attend her service and provide feedback? Oh, yeah. At least I can get a little pleasure out of being there. I also thought about the service. Don't you think it would be a good idea to serve her this Friday night at campaign headquarters? Sally was silent for a moment, then said, "No, Stan. I'm afraid I think that would be a very bad idea. If you serve her there and make the comments you plan to make, all employees, companies, those in the office will either hear you or learn about your threats almost immediately. If this happens, tomorrow it will be written about in all the newspapers, and the good and noble Mr. Douglas will be driven into a corner. He may lose the election, but he will have no incentive to threaten you or try to bribe you. I suggest delaying maintenance until she is either alone or with him alone." "Okay, I think I understand your point. Why don't we just follow them and see if they go somewhere alone tomorrow night? Usually on Fridays, Heather doesn't get home until almost midnight. I think the private investigator's report said that they usually spent some time alone in a hotel room on Friday night, usually the same one they used on Friday at noon. Couldn't we just give them room service and maybe catch them red-handed?" Sally agreed to hire a process server and break up their hotel room date on Friday night. When I entered my office, 2 men in suits were waiting for me. They introduced themselves and said they wanted to discuss how I was managing some funds for their widowed mother. I smiled and invited them into my office. After I closed the door, they came up to me and showed me their ID cards. They were from the FBI and wanted to discuss my interest in Jonathan. They worked on the case based on the materials my lawyer had already forwarded. When these 2 gentlemen learned that I was going to use the process server and tape the procedure, they also asked me to wear one of their devices to record the conversation. This request bothered me because I wondered how it would affect my plans to make some shady money off of Jonathan. My winnings, if you will. I couldn't think of a good reason to refuse them, so I agreed to put on their wire too. That evening, we all followed the 2 forgetful lovebirds from the campaign headquarters to the hotel. They left the headquarters at 7 in the evening and were in the room by 7:30. There were so many of us that it looked like a column. I was actually afraid that we would be identified. After they got to the hotel, we gave them almost an hour. I had the foresight to take my camera with me to see if I could record this period of time for posterity. I'm not usually interested in home movies, but in this case, I made an exception. We were just about to knock on the door when we received a gift from God. We heard the elevator door open, and the room service waiter came out, pushing a cart loaded with dishes. He walked up to the room and looked at us questioningly. I smiled and pointed to the door, then said, "Come in, be our guest." We had no idea that we would interrupt Mr. Douglas's dinner. "We'll just be back in a minute." The waiter smiled and said, "Okay, no problem." He knocked on the door, and when the idiot asked who it was, he said, "Room service." The door opened, and our friendly waiter entered the room. The process server and I stood out of sight and waited for the waiter to leave. When he opened the door to leave, I moved closer to prevent it from closing. Then the process server and I quietly entered the room. We stood in the doorway for a while, out of sight of the 2 traders. We waited until Jonathan and Heather started eating dinner before we fully entered the room and noticed them. I was a little ahead when we entered the room. I was shocked, appalled, and heartbroken by what I saw. I know I shouldn't have done this since I saw the detective's report, but I was. There's something special about watching a recording of something and seeing it in real life. Heather and Jonathan were naked. They sat at the table and food was laid out in front of them. They ordered some appetizers and some dessert, as well as a bottle of wine. Heather sat on Jonathan's lap with her back to him. While they cooed and fed each other from plates, at the same time they had sex. Judging by the expression on their faces, they were in 7th heaven. From time to time, Heather turned her head over her shoulder and kissed Jonathan tenderly. I started filming as we turned the corner. Finally, I nodded to the process server, and he entered the room. He asked, "Are you Jonathan Douglas and Heather Malone?" Heather screamed and jumped off Jonathan's lap. She rushed to the bed and wrapped herself in the hotel robe that was lying on her. Jonathan swore and stood up angrily. He growled, "Yes, asshole, it is, and I advise you to get the hell out of my room right now." How did you even get here? Well, sir, your room service waiter let us in as he was leaving. Didn't you hear us ask if we could come in? I was sure you invited us in. The process server walked further into the room and handed Heather the divorce papers. He said, "You have been served." I walked further into the room and Heather finally saw me. She said, "Stan, damn you. What are you doing here and what is all this talk about divorce? I will rape you if you don't stop this madness. You will have nothing left, but I will have everything." No, Heather, you won't do any of that. In fact, if you know what is best for you, you will simply sign the papers and accept the agreement I propose. When I'm done with you, I'm going to get my piece of meat from this lover. I am in the process of filing a lawsuit against him and his campaign for mental cruelty and alienation of affection. I'm certainly lucky that we live in one of the states that still allows lawsuits like this. Of course, this could influence the election as a bonus. To put it bluntly, you've been screwed, and now you're going to get it royally. Heather didn't even try to go home that evening. I didn't actually see or hear from her until the following Wednesday when she called me at work. She didn't even try to apologize or make small talk. When I answered the call, she started talking. She said, "Jonathan and I want to meet with you about this mess. We booked a conference room at the hotel for this evening. We want to end this mess so we can move on. We'll be waiting for you at 7. I didn't get any attention. I was not asked if I could come to the meeting. I was simply ordered to attend. I called Sally and told her about the phone call. Then I called my FBI contact. Sally told me to be there as well as the FBI. Sally said she would be there with me. The FBI also said they will have people nearby to help if things go south. When I arrived at the hotel, I asked where my meeting was. The receptionist led me down a hallway into the smallest of the meeting rooms. When I arrived, there was a very large man standing guard at the door. I started to go in, but he stopped me. "There is a closed meeting in this room, sir." "Yes, I know. I'm Stan Malone and I should be there." After the thug checked my ID, he knocked on the door. It opened slightly and he said, "Mr. Malone is here, sir." I didn't hear what was said, but the door closed. The big man turned to me and said, "I must search you, sir. Could you please empty the contents of your pockets into this tray?" After I emptied my pockets, I was searched. I started to get angry and demanded to know why I was being searched. The goon grinned and said, "Well, sir, people have been known to try to assassinate political leaders, and Mr. Douglas doesn't want to take any chances." I strongly suspected that they were searching me for a voice recorder or wiretapping, but I didn't ask. I had fairly long hair, and the little transmitters I carried around were hidden in it, glued to my head. After the search, almost 5 minutes passed before the door opened, and I was allowed to enter the conference room. When I walked into the room, I saw Heather sitting at the table, looking at me. She looked very guilty, and her face and chest were very flushed. When Heather moved to sit up, I saw that she was not wearing panties. I looked at Jonathan and almost lost control of myself. His eyes sparkled, and he grinned. I knew he was gloating about the fact that he had just slept with my wife. The meeting went exactly as Sally and I had expected. Jonathan threatened me, first with termination of my job, then with bodily harm, unless I offered Heather a better deal and abandoned my stated plans to file lawsuits against him and his campaign. I leaned back in my chair and said, "Listen to me, mister. I know that you and your friends may be able to get to me and perhaps hurt or kill me, but that will not save you. I took precautions and prepared several packages to send if anything happened to me or my family. Even if I get injured in an accident, these packages will be sent by mail. You know as well as I do that you cannot control all the media in this country. Some of them will be published, especially if I am seriously injured or die. You will go down." I watched as anger filled Jonathan's face and saw the tension that I had learned years ago meant Heather was furious. I smiled at them and continued to say, "I know what you were doing just before I came in here, and I have photos of you doing it several more times. Heck, I even have photos and recordings of your meeting last week at the hotel with the union and senior members of the city government. Do you really think all these gentlemen will thank you for dragging them along? I can assure you that if anything happens to me, the paperwork that is mailed will have information about them and my wife as well as you. We both know that many of them communicate with, shall we say, dangerous people with whom it is dangerous to cross paths. Heather glared at me, and I thought Jonathan looked a little sick. He tried to be indignant and said, "You heard what I said. Stop your threats and do it quietly. Otherwise, now get your ass out of here." I said my word. I smiled and stood up. I looked into Jonathan's eyes until he started to look worried. I could tell it was all he could do. Keep staring back at me. I laughed and turned to head towards the door. As I opened the door, I stopped again and said, "You know, Jonathan, I might change my mind if I was confident of a very fair divorce settlement from my wife. Damn it, if the idiots in this town decide to elect you, they deserve what they get." I went straight home, and when I got there, I found my private investigator friend waiting for me. He and the FBI agent were visiting. They both took off their microphones and secured them. My private investigator said, "We got all of this in the conversation that Jonathan had with your wife and his friends after you left. He put you under surveillance with orders to keep an eye on you and let him know if they could find anything harmful about you at all. You made him very, very worried. I waited 3 days and then made sure my tale from Jonathan was with me when I called my lawyer. First we discussed divorce, then as I was ending the conversation I said, 'Sally, I'm tired of waiting for this idiot.' I told him and Heather what it would take for me to leave, and so far they are both blocking me. Prepare documents and file a lawsuit against Jonathan. I think we need to give a higher figure. Let's ask for $10,000. This should get his attention and be all over the news." I laughed to myself when I saw the thug who had been following me step back and grab his cell phone. I watched as he talked and gesticulated excitedly. I got into my car and drove straight home. I hadn't even finished dinner that night when Jonathan called me. He never admitted that his man heard me tell Sally to sue. He said, "Listen, idiot. Heather and I discussed our meeting and decided to give you some of what you asked for. She will sign the divorce papers you gave her without changes. She will leave your marriage with only her personal assets and quit her job. I have decided to enter into an out-of-court voluntary settlement agreement with you if you assure me that nothing will come out of this." Well, asshole, all I can do about this is promise you that I won't be the one to let things slide. Naturally, I cannot promise that no one will let the cat out of the bag. I mean, right now, there are probably hundreds of people who know that you're sleeping with my wife. Okay, here's the thing. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I will transfer $1 million into your account, no questions asked. Heather turns over the divorce papers, signed in agreement with your proposed agreement. I laughed and said, "Damn it, this is a small thing. I just instructed my lawyer to file a claim for $10 million in damages. I know I probably won't get it, but you need to make way more than $1 million before I drop the claim. Heck, I can make over $1 million in book and movie rights if I sell this story." Good. I think I can offer a little more, but not much. How about $1.7 million? I think I can do without unnecessary words. I'll figure out some way to show that it was spent on the campaign, but this is my main suggestion. Okay, but we need to move on. I won't tell my lawyer to stop her until I see the money in my bank account. Here are the secret account numbers in the Cayman Islands. I didn't tell him that I opened an account in his name and used his mailing address. I was hoping that federal investigators would find this and trace the money from his campaign to the bank. Of course, I planned to transfer the money on the day it arrived so that it could not be returned. Later that evening, I heard my doorbell ring. When I got there, I saw the same man who was guarding the door during my meeting with Jonathan and Heather. He looked at me and handed me a clipboard with a one-page legal document. He said, "Mr. Douglas told me to bring this to you for your signature." I read the document, then looked at it. I said, "I think everything is fine, but before I sign, I need to discuss this with my lawyer." "Well, I shouldn't leave without this." I sighed and closed the door in his face. I went to my office and called Sally. When I explained the problem, she agreed to come to my home and review the document. It took her almost an hour to get there, but after she read the document, she smiled and told me to sign it. 3 days later, I discovered that the Cayman Islands account balance was $1,700,000. That same day, my lawyer called me and told me that Heather had returned the signed divorce agreement and it had been filed with the court. Since the divorce was uncontested, it would become final within 30 days. I already transferred the money from the Cayman account in case this asshole tries to get it back. I transferred it internationally twice, then transferred it to another account at another bank in the Cayman Islands under a different fictitious name. I continued to work during these difficult times, but my production suffered. My commissions were almost half what they usually were, and not just because of the bad economy. Many times one of my colleagues covered for me, and they received a commission on the sales and purchases made by my clients. After the divorce was final, I still couldn't get my thoughts together. I made more mistakes at work, and it cost me dearly. If I bought or sold something wrong for a client, I had to honor the terms of the deal. I'm tired of constantly looking over my shoulder to make sure nothing happened to me. I was afraid that at some point Jonathan and his friends would decide to take a chance and hurt me for what I had done to him. I was especially worried about retaliation when the feds finally turned on all the players. One evening, I was sitting at home, wondering how my life could turn into hell so quickly, when the doorbell rang. It was already after 9 in the evening. When I opened the door, I saw Heather standing there. She was crying, and there was a big red spot on her face. I could tell she'd be bruised like hell by morning. She looked at me, then her gaze dropped to the floor. She said, "Stan, please, can I talk to you?" I almost told her no and slammed the door in her face, but then I decided to see what could make her come to me to talk. I stepped back and motioned for her to come inside. I didn't say a word. I simply took her back to the office and sat her in my chair. I still had security cameras running and wanted to talk where the image would be better. I made sure to point her towards the sofa so the cameras could get the best shot. Heather sat and looked at me, silently crying. Finally, she said, "Stan, I know it's too late, but Heather took a deep breath and continued, "I want to apologize to you for what I did to us. I knew better, but somehow this bastard broke through my defenses. You know how much I love to flirt and how much I want to succeed. Somehow he knew exactly which of my buttons to push, and I fell madly in love with him. It was like he was completely in tune with me, and I just couldn't say no to him. I was so excited about the promising job he promised me after the election, if I helped him, that I lost track of us." Heather was crying loudly now. She looked at me and said, "Do you know how angry I was with you on New Year's Eve when you tried to separate us? Oh, Stan, you were already late last time when you pulled me away from Jonathan. We just returned to the room from one of Doug's bedrooms. This bastard convinced me to have sex with him a little less than 3 hours after I met him. I am so sorry. It only took 3 weeks of running behind your back before I was convinced that I needed to be completely in his camp. He promised to divorce his wife and marry me after the elections. He told me he couldn't file for divorce early because it could cost him the election. I fell in love with the idea of being married to a mayor and perhaps later a senator or governor. After the trouble you caused, I began to feel that Jonathan was moving away from me. This evening in the office, I caught him in the warehouse with one of the young students who work as volunteers. You were right, as always, Stan. He filled her head with the same shit he filled mine with. He promised to leave his wife and marry her as soon as the elections were over. I stood up to them and he laughed at me. He asked me what made me think that he would ever marry an old slut like me, especially one who had a history of cheating on her husband and having sex with multiple partners. He told me that if I treated him well, he would keep me with him and I could live a good life as his social secretary. He laughed at me and said that I could entertain some of his most important members, as I had done in the past. His new slut laughed at me and I slapped him in the face. Then he hit me. Stan, I know it's too late for us, but I wanted you to know that I finally realized this, and I wanted to apologize for what I did to us. To you, really. Stan, if you could find the strength to forgive me, I would really like for us to get back together. I knew I had a good man, but there was something about Jonathan that I couldn't resist. I got so excited when I thought about possibly having a great life with him that I lost all common sense. Heather looked at me for a moment longer. I watched as silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Finally, she gave me a hesitant smile, stood up, and walked over to my chair. Heather leaned forward and kissed me tenderly on the cheek, then ran out of the room and out of the house. I sat there in shock for a moment before approaching the door just in time to see her car drive away. I sighed and thought how much I wished she would come to her senses before spreading her legs for this asshole and his union and government supporters. I turned and walked back to the office. A few days later, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to get away from all the memories and pain. I put my house on the market and hired a real estate agent to find me another one without the memories. I hired a crew to come and pack my furniture for storage. I hired another crew to clean the house and another to do the yard. From time to time, I would call Doug or Sally back. They said the feds retained control of the investigation in case police were also corrupt. There was an agreement not to mention my name in the investigation and not to use information provided by Sally, unless absolutely necessary. Sally told me the feds had found enough evidence of corruption that they were willing to honor the agreement. Almost 6 weeks after I decided to sell my house, I woke up to a special broadcast on all the national news programs. The feds arrested everyone involved in Jonathan's use of Heather. They were charged with several counts, including, but not limited to, misappropriation of funds, corruption, abuse of power, campaign violations, and racketeering. Jonathan was arrested for misusing campaign funds, improperly accepting donations beyond what is allowed by law, and selling rights to appointive positions in his intended future administration. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, Heather was also arrested for some violations. I called Sally as soon as her office opened that morning to see if she could shed any light on the subject. All she knew at that time was that there were leaks from people other than me, so it seemed that everything would be clear to me with Jonathan and his payment. Of course, he couldn't get it back, but if he had sued me over the NDA, it was possible, even likely, that I would have won, because the FBI and news services had credited 2 company employees with the tips that started investigation. I just hope I'm not suspected of informing on union members. I didn't need a visit from shady characters in the middle of the night. I smiled to myself as I thought how hard I had worked to sneak incriminating notes and documents into the piles of paper some of the workers were processing. I did this many times when I was supposedly in the office looking for Heather. After finishing my conversation with Sally, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. I got my revenge on Jonathan and freed myself from my cheating wife, at no cost other than my lawyer's fees. I'm also $1.7 million richer thanks to Jonathan's generosity. Now I was free, and could find a worthy woman to marry and start a family with.